So hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Lemongrass Roots where we look at all things to do with SAP. Today I've got two colleagues that are on the podcast with me. Very excited to have Randall Grogan, who's the Senior Director of SAP in Energy Transfer. And also joined is Rogan Morrison from Lemongrass. So welcome to both of you.
Good to be here. Thanks, Eamonn.
So today we're going to talk about energy transfer and the journey they've been taking as they've been modernizing their SAP landscape. And Randall has been obviously very central to this, given this in his purview. But first off, Randall, I think for the listeners, it would be great to learn a bit about your background. Where have you been? What have you done? And how did you get to the position you're in today? If you don't mind giving us a quick run through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So morning, everybody. Good afternoon. I think depending on where everybody is at. I'm Randall Grogan, and as Eamonn's already mentioned, I'm currently the senior director reporting to our CIO at Energy Transfer. But I spent the bulk of my career in consulting in some shape or form. 3 of the 4 Big Four, and Gartner, and so forth. And so I've worked with most of the upstream, midstream, a lot of majors and super majors in the industry. And pretty much from the very, very early days have going back to R3, 21C, 21D, had been doing basically implementations of SAP. So, the typical, you start off being the configurator, then the team lead, and the project director, program director. So that kind of leads all the way up to where I'm at, and kind of how I ended up being where I'm at now was effectively I came on to Energy Transfer about 6-7 years. Actually, I've been here for 7.5 years. And I came when we were in the middle of a big application rationalization project, rationalizing 50 applications down, 2 of those being older SAP ECC systems, plus a miscellaneous other financial systems, all the way down into a single implementation of S4HANA. So, we implemented S4HANA, somewhere around 6 years ago, effectively. We brought Energy Transfer into there, and we brought Sunoco into there, and we brought, most recently, we're bringing USAC into there. And that probably is a good time for me to tell you a little bit about Energy Transfer, because what I will say is that most folks don't know us, and that's okay. We are, by most measures, the largest midstream, the largest pipeline company in the United States and North America in general. Energy Transfer themselves has a very large first purchasing business. So we purchase, 40, 50,000 transactions every month as supply for our pipelines. We have and then what people have heard of is Sunoco. So Sunoco is our largest subsidiary, and they are also publicly traded. USAC, USA Compression, a professional services company that the services they provide is compression services, and we are not surprisingly, their largest customer as well. So a little vertical integration there. So effectively, all of those coexist in our S4 system. We built that as a platform for acquisition, and acquire we do. We acquire a lot of things. So, we acquired Newstar and Crestwood and WTG, and we had to reschedule this podcast last week because I was in Calgary because of a Parkland acquisition. And Parkland is a $26-30 billion organization out of Calgary, Canada, with operations in Calgary and the U.S. and 23 different countries in the Caribbean. So a big part of my job is to do these acquisitions and roll them into our SAP, and then go back out and basically try to get all those systems wound down. So and here we are today.
But I mean, it's fantastic background, because 2 things jump out straight away. One is you guys have critical infrastructure, so you're part of a very, very important company, and the systems need to be incredibly resilient and secure. And the second thing that jumps out is the agility you need to be able to bring in new systems that quickly. You need to have the agility. So it's rare to see a company succeed in both, of having both highly resilient, high quality, as well as that agility. So, so congratulations on the work you guys have done so far. I mean, it has been phenomenal. But yeah, that maybe starts to bring us towards what we worked with you on last year and into this year, but around with your next step. So the S4 simplification was again a big success for you, but you were then obviously looking to understand what SAP's strategy was around RISE and weighing up your options. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your going in position to that and how you saw it at the start of that journey.
Yeah. I mean, so it shouldn't surprise anybody. SAP has been talking to all clients about RISE for several years. I'll be honest with you, Energy Transfer was not really keen on making that journey, but we knew if we're going to be doing it, it had to be coinciding with, our system's already in our data center. And yes, anybody knows when you run these things, it runs on very expensive hardware. So I continuously told SAP, I said, look, the time to have this discussion with us is when, ultimately the end of life comes from the hardware that we've already invested in. I think in general, we also didn't want to be an early adopter for an organization our size. On top of that, I continuously said, look, I said, part of the conversation we had all the way back when we were doing our S4 implementation, over 6 years ago, was our organization really wants to have a handle on and manage and own the infrastructure that's associated with this. Well before the whole Colonial Pipeline issues that happened, and the recognition just how critical the midstream business was to the U.S. and just to operate. So ultimately we kept pushing them back, and it finally came to in 2024, and they finally came back to me and said, "Hey, we've got this thing." I said, "And that thing is?" And they said, "We can actually do it in your data center now." And that was the first time, I think, in early 24 that I heard of the CDC model. So ultimately, it was kind of a pushback on SAP all the way up until 24. And we recognized that at some point in time as an organization that we were going to have to go to RISE. The matter of it was kind of what is, from our organization, what's the right timing? When do we have the most leverage to make that jump so that we could kind of do it on our own schedule and on our own terms? And we felt that probably 2024 was the right time. Maybe 2025, but I think I can argue that anything past that and you're going to be in a position where SAP is going to make it very painful financially for you to effectively stay where you're at, and your leverage is going to be substantially less. So those are all kind of deciding factors. They came up with a CDC model, and I'll talk more about why we felt as an organization that was the right for us, but as well, from a hardware perspective, we were coming on end of life. So the timing was all kind of coming together so that, 2024 really was the right time to sign that deal. If we're going to do it, that was the time. If we didn't, we were going to, continue on with the model we have in our data center. And then, I guess they'd have another crack at it when our hardware's at end of life next time. But, so we started that conversation, and ultimately that's when we engaged Lemongrass. So.
That's I mean, again, it's a set of factors that a lot of customers are trying to balance as well. The exact same things: hardware refreshes, contract renewals, wherever it might be, and trying to coincide that, as you say, the earlier you do deal with SAP, it seems, the more flexibility, at least the more incentives there might be to make a deal.
Yeah. But it's a balance, because the earlier you do it, the less mature it is as well. So you kind of trying to balance a little bit between, you don't want to be the first guy, but you don't want to wait and be amongst the last either. So there's a sweet spot in there, and I don't know. We're all kind of trying to guess, and I think a few years down the road we'll know if we were right or not. We're all trying to guess kind of what the right answer is. So
Rogan, obviously from our side, you got engaged with Randall around this time. Now it was our first CDC deal as well. But from what Randall's saying, I mean, is that a typical setup where he was? Do other customers know about CDC? What have you seen with all the customers you've been chatting to, and how's that compared to what Energy Transfer have gone through?
Yeah, so it was really interesting to see CDC in the context of a larger organization. I'd picked up on CDC about 2 or 3 years before that. It had come out, but it was very little known in the marketplace. SAP had not started to really ramp up the opportunity in that space, part of the private tailored option market. Most organizations were looking at private cloud enterprise, etc. So for a lot of customers, I'd actually kind of indicated and said, well, this is an option, but a lot of customers, they're in different spaces with regards to their hardware and their engagement with SAP. So from a RISE customer perspective, the CDC option definitely has a lot of value to offer for certain customers in certain spaces. Definitely. There is definitely, and I think for Energy Transfer specifically, it's definitely what we saw as the right model in terms of going down that pathway with an SAP contract that really suits their business specifically. I think it gives them a lot of flexibility. It also allows them to bring on additional customers and restructure their data, and from a sovereignty perspective is very important. So I think that's the key aspect around the RISE CDC model is a lot of organizations looking for that security and data, and how do they gain that? And so therefore, I think it's wise that SAP opened a channel or a doorway for them to go down that road. And I think it's proven that definitely for the case of Energy Transfer.
Yeah. And I'll say I've had a lot of organizations reach out in the last, few months, really wanting to have a conversation around CDC and, that direction. And I've also had just some somewhat informal conversations with some large organizations that, really started doing the RISE migration before CDC became available, and have, basically said, we really wish that had been available for us. So, for us, and as Rogan kind of already mentioned, cybersecurity, very, very important to us.
Absolutely.
And we feel like we've got better control if, although it's a private cloud, and, for all intents and purposes, we don't have a lot of access to it. It really is run and maintained by physically by HPE, but by SAP and whomever they have in the back end maintaining that. So it really is a private cloud in our data center, but it's behind our firewall, and and we have more control over it. And I should mention that as I mentioned, we're midstream, and probably 98% of the transactions that we do come from our commercial systems, which are also in the data center and are not going anywhere anytime soon. So from a latency standpoint, having it in our data center made a lot of sense. So there's a lot of reasons we did that, but I'd say number one is probably cybersecurity. Number two is just a certain comfort level that our organization and the leadership had in having everything in our own, so to speak, four walls. And we still feel like that's the right answer. And having talked a lot of work. And by the way, I should mention that just talking to HP and talking to some of the folks within fairly leadership levels of kind of the CDC model for SAP. There's evidently quite a number of organizations, good-sized organizations, that are heading down this path right now. I've been told north of 20 or so right now are actively having conversations. So
yeah, I mean, we certainly see like a broader demand for sovereign cloud stroke CDC, you know, where people can see extended controls, some controls they want to have themselves, as you guys have,
Yeah.
you know, keep it within your perimeter. Other
Yeah.
people, you know, will follow you know, a local jurisdiction potentially in a sovereign cloud. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of that begin to percolate up, and I think SAP are, you know, providing solutions to both now. So when it came to the deal structure, was there anything specifically different in the way, you know, Rogan, you would have seen with other customers, and maybe Randall, maybe different to what you expected, but maybe Rogan, if you go first, how would you see the
Yeah.
difference here, and what in that deal structure stood out to you?
Yeah, there's definitely some key differences when you look at it in comparison to a normal, or not only, just a difference in context around the PCE model, the private cloud enterprise, or what SAP is offering now, cloud ERP, versus a RISE CDC structure. There are definitely nuances within that constructual breakdown that are different for different customers. It depends on sizing, it depends on the different elements within that, again, around infrastructure, around certain of the key elements like digital access. So there are certain nuances that definitely play a very important role. And I think, you know, during the process of the project that we worked together alongside yourself, Randall, and the team was to, you know, bring those to the surface and say, okay, what is going to work best for you as an organization, and to highlight those and bring out the best value for that. Because there are, as I said earlier, there are different value propositions that SAP bring to different clients within the construct of that model, and then to be able to highlight those gives the best value to energy transfer in that context.
I mean, clearly the most obvious is we spent a lot of time negotiating back and forth on hardware. So clearly, if you go to a hyperscaler, that's not even a question you need to have. But you know, we had, you know, we used they've renamed it, but HP Superdome Flex is what we use, and we've used now. They've renamed it, but it's basically the newer version of the same. And we had very strong opinions as to how these were structured and how we connected those between our primary and our, you know, business continuity center in Dallas. So, you know, we spent a lot of time between HPE and SAP's, you know, architects kind of going through and making sure that we agreed to, you know, what the hardware that was going into there. Because, you know, when we started the conversation, you know, they said, well, you know, 99.7 is what we offer. And we said, yeah, you know, we have 99 and, you know, at least 3 nines after that. So that's not really where we want to be. And they said, well, they came back and said, well, we can offer you 99.9, but we're getting better than that. So that's fine. But, you know, we really pushed for the 99.9, and, you know, for us, it was worth I think the additional cost. And I should say that's around the productive systems and less than that around the non-prod systems. But, you know, downtime is, you know, like a lot of large organizations, it's very problematic for us. So we are wanting to make sure that that, you know, we have at least the infrastructure to support uptime. If there's a reason the system is going to be down, I need to make sure that it's not the hardware as part of that process. And if it does go down, I need to make sure that ultimately we have, you know, snapshots and backups so that we can get it, you know, back up in as quickly as possible, you know, not measuring in hours, but measuring in minutes. So we're really working very hard with them to try to make sure that we're not taking a step backwards. And that was kind of a big part of the conversation we had at SAP. I said, look, you all want us to go to RISE. That's all really good. We don't feel that we as an organization should pay more for that. And we don't feel like we should have to take a step back in terms of you know, what we're getting from our systems and what we get from, you know, reliability from our systems. So so that's, you know, was what we really negotiated quite hard on.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think definitely the RISE offering has matured. It's got a bit better over time, and you know, it's in response to demand like that. The customers need to see this. Certainly, customers of the scale and importance of energy transfer. So, you know, very important if any other customers are in the same boat, to make sure you vocalize that during the negotiations for sure. And then in terms of what happens since, so obviously you got a deal agreed, and you're midway through the project now. I mean, what about the broader modernization? Where you go with this project, but also the integration. Also, I remember you telling me that one of the things you negotiated was some AI credits, and you felt there was that was one of the big drivers that you wanted to release. So maybe if you can kind of elaborate a little bit on next steps, as it were, what comes next.
Yeah, so I mean, unlike a RISE model that goes to the private cloud, to the hyperscaler ultimate, well, they're all private cloud, excuse me, that goes to Azure or wherever. Because it's coming in our data center, ultimately there's a lag between the time you sign the deal, and like any of these good deals, this was signed on December 31st. So there's approximately a 6-month lag between the time you ink the deal and between the time the hardware rolls into the data center. And HPE rolls these in as racks in the data center. And our job in the interim is to make sure that we have the power and the connectivity. And in our case, we've put them in their own cage, so there's really no question around access or anything along those lines. But that's approximately a 6 months time frame. So we took that time to really upgrade our system from 2021 to 2023 because it's the combination of 2023 and if you're on a RISE model that gives you access, to your point, AI. And SAP, in their cash flow statement, assigned a lot of value to AI. And I don't know what its value is going to be because, we're just really now digging into it. I think it's becoming more real and less vapor. I've always expected it to be real, but ultimately we're just now really kind of getting around to, now that we have upgraded the 2023, now that we are, in the position where we have the hardware in our data center, and we've just started upgrading our first sandbox system just to give anybody real time of where we're at in this overall migration process. It's really time for us to start looking at AI and the value that it can bring to the organization, start looking at those 1,600 use cases that SAP touts, and ultimately, which ones are right for us. And, to your point, I negotiated what I think is a lot of AI credits. I don't yet really know exactly what that means, because without understanding kind of what the, for anybody that's working through kind of the BTP and the consumption model, you don't really know what your credits are worth until you understand what the cost is associated with the consumption. So I think I've negotiated a reasonable amount. I think we'll start finding out, because we're starting to put together the governance now associated with how do we as an organization choose which AI functions are important to us. How do we test these in our sandbox environment so we can understand what the consumption model, really is, and ultimately, we can make the business case for each one of these AIs to activate them or not activate them, as the case may be. So, so we're just on that part of the journey right now. As I think I mentioned, the hardware came into our data center back right before June sort of time frame, and actually I guess maybe early May time frame. So we are actually before that, April May time frame. So we are in the point where SAP is starting to hand over environments to us, and we're starting to configure those for our usage. And so ultimately, to your point, I can keep talking, but ultimately to your point, we're starting to look at what can AI bring to us as an organization. How do we put governance around that?
No, I mean, I think that's what everybody wants to get to. Everybody is very curious about what's available.
Yeah.
And I think they all recognize they have to go through this transformation to get there.
Yeah.
Rogan, one more question for you. In terms of customers you've seen, where Randall is now with energy transfer, are there some things they should be thinking about prior to signing a RISE deal that will help them, get to where Randall is, quickly as well, that they can unleash these AI capabilities?
Yeah.
What do you think on that?
Well, I guess I would. Go ahead,
Go
Rogan.
ahead, Randall.
No.
Go for it. I'll jump in after you if you want.
Well, no, I was going to say, don't underestimate the effort of doing your due diligence and ultimately signing the deal that's right for your organization. It is not a simple, straightforward process. When you start recognizing just contractually, I think we've got 21, if not slightly more than that, different not SLAs, but really metrics by which our usage is modeled after. So everything from revenue to assets under management to, your employee count, as, kind of functional user equivalents, all these things. And none of them are particularly easy to measure. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it is a long, drawn out process, and you need to think very carefully around not just where you're at now, but where do you think you're going to be in the, because ours is a 6-year deal. It started to be a 5-year deal, and we pushed it to be a 6-year deal. But where do you think you're going to be in that time frame? And trying to negotiate yourself a way that, you're not 3 years into this deal and go, man, I really wish I had thought about that 3 years ago. So, for an organization like us that does lots of acquisitions, I wanted to make sure that I was not one acquisition away from, having to renegotiate with SAP for this additional product or for this, because, unlike a hyperscaler, when we go up in size, we physically have to put additional memory in there. So, and SAP has to agree with what that cost is. And there are some increments by which you do that. We're on, I think ours is a 7.5 terabyte system, but if you go the next size jump up, it's not 8, it's not 10, it's like to 12 or 16. So, we've kind of pre-negotiated some of those things. So it's, once you sign, you have less leverage, I would say. So, Rogan, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I think there's some key things for most customers that are new to them. The first is moving off a perpetual type model into a subscription type model.
Yeah.
I think the second thing is not all of the elements are restructured in price lists. They're now available on like a marketplace. So this is a new thing that customers have to get to grips with. And as what you said, Randall, the metrics by which SAP measure things is one, very varied, and it changes on a regular basis. So in one sense, you maybe have had a simple business metric that was measured on users. It's now revenue, or it's now a certain consumption level. And that adds a level of complexity that for most organizations, they struggle to first of all, get their head around it, because the number of different alternatives is so great. And then they have to then try and come down and break those down into, let's call it edible type chunks, and say, what can I really digest? At the same time, what you guys did was really key in terms of setting up a way in which you could kind of future protect your organization by buying at the same price for a longer period of time.
Yeah.
So that helps you, especially if you're doing acquisitions, where you're continuously bringing people, new organizations in, and over time, you're not paying an incremental increase. That's a very smart move. So those types of things are where, you can seek and get better leverage out of the negotiation that you have from a engagement with SAP. And I think SAP, because of your unique state, being in the CDC space, has those levers and is prepared to play on the same ballpark as yourselves. And I think that's what I would encourage most other customers is like, looking to the future.
Yeah.
Do your due diligence. Make sure you really understand the nitty gritty, the little, as we always say, the devil's in the detail. Understand the detail, because it's in that space that you need to get the best out of your contract from SAP perspective.
Yeah. I know even having thought through, we refer to it as the teacup, how much is there a product that we think we might need in the future, but we don't need right now? Can I lock that price in right now?
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is by purchasing just a very small amount of it. the smallest block size you can do. And we tried to do that for some items. And then, of course, as part of this Parkland acquisition, I've already missed some. But we've tried to look forward and think about what might we require as part of a future acquisition, either from a growth size or just because, it pushes us, to, get a different SAP component. So, we've tried to think that through. And even while actively thinking that through, I'm already, missed the boat on a few items. Nothing huge, but, it's kind of one of those. My past self missed it.
Yeah. And I think, what you said there, Randall, is absolutely true. I mean, okay, there is no silver, or let's say the crystal ball to the future. But I think there's ways in which you can, as I say, you guys, from a negotiation perspective and from a contract perspective, try to see as far into the future from an AI and what possibly could come up and be of benefit to you in the future. Yeah. And then, as you said, take a smaller slither of it, start working on it, start understanding it, start growing your competency in that space. A lot of customers want to push it, maybe further down the road, but if you start in a small way, it helps you to gain maturity much quicker. And I think that's really where you then start proving the benefit of it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, from our perspective, we were actually pretty well positioned. And I say that because, we're an energy organization, and energy is not known for being cutting edge or bleeding edge by any stretch. Matter of fact, we tend to be behind the curve a little bit as an industry. But as an organization, we already moved to S4 HANA 6 years ago, approximately. So we've already had that experience. I mean, I think the challenge for a lot of organizations right now, particularly in my industry, is a lot of them are basically coming off a bit of the burning platform. They're coming off the ECC platform. And so, for us, this migration, I kind of embrace the term lift and shift. I think some folks use that kind of derogatorily, but, in my case, I'm like, no, I embrace that. I really want to do as much as I can from a system perspective and the change perspective before the migration. I don't want anything in that migration outside of the physically moving from this hardware to that hardware, all the new plumbing and the network that needs to be set up. And then ultimately, it's literally only the RACI that changes, who's responsible for what after that. I think organizations, as they're trying to do this much more transformational change, because some organizations are really coming in from the ECC upgrade to HANA as part of that RISE migration, and that's a big beast to try to do all at the same time, and to do well all at the same time. So I guess if you didn't ask the question, but I will say my advice would be, if you can somehow manage to keep each of those as being kind of separate, integral sort of projects, I think you have a better opportunity to do that smoothly than if you try to do that all at one time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you certainly good advice. Generally speaking, as you say, separate them into two separate projects, control the variability separately does reduce the risk for sure. But look, again, we could talk all day on this for sure. I mean, it's a really interesting situation you're in. Look, but what I'd like to do is just wrap up quickly towards the end of this. So I'll just let each of you have the last word about what your key takeaways were. What you'd like to leave the listeners with. Rogan, if you want to go first, and then we'll let Randall wrap up at the end.
Sure. I think the key takeaways from the engagement that we had from an energy transfer perspective was, look at the perspectives and the options that SAP puts on the table, find the value levers and pull those to the best of your ability. And I think, as Randall rightly said, try and build in as much flexibility into the future that helps you to smooth the path away for the future organization that you're going to be operating in over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Rogan has said. And I would add to it just to say, treat the whole negotiation, the conversation around rise and the metric. Treat it like a project. I mean, don't underestimate the effort that it's going to take. Make sure that you're talking to lots of folks that's part of that process. I mean, you are it no matter what. I mean, I guess maybe not for Rogan, but for me at least, I'm only going to be negotiating a rise contract probably once in my career. So, get help, talk to folks, hire somebody, read things, go talk to your peers that have already done this. Because I mean, every time I would talk to somebody, I'd find something out and I'd learn something. I'd go back and I'd say, hey, what about this? And they said, oh yeah, that. So, we had lots of discovery that went on as part of that. And honestly, if I hadn't had these conversations, I feel like I would be in a not as good position as we are right now. So, I mean, I think it's just really important to give it enough time and treat it like a project and kind of understand all of the, and write them down, understand all the things that are important to you as your organization, and, what are just showstoppers versus, what are things that you can negotiate on. Because we had a handful of things that we would not have signed the deal. And some of those went all the way up to, the end of the kind of the day before, or even the morning of. And we just had to say, look, guys, I said, these are things that our CEO will not sign this unless this is written in this way. And just understand what those are, because you don't want to be second guessing what those are in the last minute.
Absolutely. I mean, it seems obvious, but it's really important. As you say, this is not a regular event, and you do bring in some expertise and go at it hard. Well, look, Randall, it's been fantastic insight. Thank you so much for sharing it with the listeners. Rogan, thanks as well for your contribution. It's always good to talk to you. And to the listeners, I'd just like to say thanks again for tuning in, and look forward to speaking to you again in a couple of weeks' time with our next episode of Lemongrass Roots. So goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, man. Take care.